So settling back into your sitting posture, and just seeing how you're holding your body, wanting to be in an aligned posture where the head and shoulders, the spine are in a balanced alignment. And you could be sitting with your eyes closed or just lowering your gaze. Turning the attention inward into the body, to the sensations of sitting, sensations in the body. Oh, it's helpful to start our practice with a just relaxation, a bit of softening through any areas of tension in the body. One way to do that is just scanning from the head to the toes. So relaxing tension in the face, the jaw, the eyes, releasing the shoulders, softening the belly. And letting the awareness just hold the whole body, feeling the body as a single object, seeing that within that single object there are many different sensations all happening simultaneously. We see clearly that the body is not just one thing, just as our mind is not one thing, or that our idea of self is not one thing. From awareness of the body, we open then to awareness of sound. Each of us in our own environment. Awareness of sound gives us a sense of the more spacious or expansive quality of our consciousness, of awareness itself. So awareness of body, awareness of sound, and then on a more subtle level, awareness of feeling or mood. This can be a little bit more tricky to feel, to be aware of. What are you feeling right now? There may not be a label or name you can put on it, but you can still tune in on that subtle level to the felt experience. The term feeling tone can actually be helpful in this stage of mindfulness. What is the feeling tone? And in that way, you might simply label it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. That way you stay out of sort of trying to name it or judge it. Sometimes our feeling tone is a mixture. There's pleasant, there's unpleasant, there's neutral. As our mindfulness becomes more refined, these are the kinds of details we can start to observe in our experience. And now to give yourself a grounding focus, to let the attention come to the breath, feeling the sensations of breath either at the nostrils or the belly, letting that be your concentration object, your anchor, the place to which you return each time the mind wanders. and wander the mind must do. Our relationship to the wandering mind is really key to our meditation practice. It's easy to get frustrated with thoughts, feel like we're battling with them, try to find a way to suppress them, push them away. But our thoughts, our mind doesn't, they don't respond to that kind of treatment. More useful to just acknowledge them and come back to the breath. At times we might observe the content, and oftentimes we see that the thoughts are unproductive, or that they don't reflect any reality, that they are perhaps neurotic, you know, that they are self-centered, they are based in fear or resentment. And just looking at them allows us to see through them, to see how transparently false they are, or if not false, of no use, of no value. Why put our time and energy into thoughts which only harm us or make us feel worse, or just waste our time? Why not just come back to the breath and be here, be in your present moment experience? It's in this quiet that we find peace. There's no peace to be found in our thoughts. All right. So we've been uh, the last couple of classes we've been uh, talking about renunciation, which I have to admit I was surprised that this became a topic that I could really talk about for this often, and and really, one of the joys of being a teacher is being forced to look deeply into a topic. Of course, it's not that I've never thought about renunciation, and or even that I haven't taught about it, but sometimes something kind of hits you, and I kind of had this, I dare I say, insight into renunciation, where felt that it was really worth exploring these three different types of renunciation. And so the first type of renunciation is external renunciation, which is, of course, what we do as addicts, uh, which is, I think, one of the things that makes addicts particularly comfortable with Buddhist teachings. A lot of people don't really appreciate being told they should give things up if they want to have a spirit, be on a spiritual path, and whereas addicts really get that right away. So recognizing external renunciation, which includes all the kind of ascetic practices and things like celibacy and various austerities. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that we're all taking on every one of these, but just to kind of have this category. And that's typically what we think we're talking about when we talk about renunciation. Um, but then the second session, I talked about renouncing uh, greed, hatred, and delusion. So, which comes out of, we renounce them because we see that they cause suffering. We see that greed and hatred and delusion, that they just create pain within us when we are acting out of them, when we are thinking, when our thinking is driven by them. And that's when the Buddha talks about renunciation, he makes this point. He says, most people think of renunciation as this external thing, but real renunciation is renouncing greed, hatred, and delusion. But then there's a third kind of renunciation, which is the one I'm going to address today, which is founded in the idea of renouncing self. And here we really get to like a core Buddhist principle, the the transparency of uh, and emptiness of ego. Um, and so this is why I was looking at the AA Big Book this morning, because when I first thought about this as a topic, I immediately thought about the part of the Big Book where it talks about self, which is in the How It Works chapter, uh, when it starts to talk about step 3, which is the first requirement in this turning it over, is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. And then it has the whole little metaphor of the actor who wants to run the whole show. And then what usually happens, everybody gets resentful towards the person who's self-centered, right? Uh, it's classic kind of Bill Wilson stuff. Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. This is, 85 years ago, I guess. He is like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century. Politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. That one does sound familiar. But then, of course, comes the classic phrase, selfishness, self-centeredness. That, we think, is the root of our troubles. driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he doesn't usually think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. Then, unfortunately, he says that God makes that possible, but we'll let that one go for today. Uh, just my point being, of course, that here in this analysis of the roots of addiction is that the root is self, and now this is another place where we can kind of see that 12-step literature has something to say that's really relevant to us, but the Dharma takes it further, right? Because Bill Wilson is not recognizing the emptiness of self. He's just seeing the destructiveness of self-centeredness. And so where his solution is ask God to remove your selfishness, the Dharma suggests that if we have insight into the emptiness of self, that's how we remove that problem. We don't have to call on an external force. It's rather through having a deep insight into the emptiness of self, then there's no longer any energy around it. Either way, it's kind of getting us to the same thing, which is I think that the starting point has to be mindfulness of how we relate to self and how, whether it's in Bill Wilson's terms, self-centeredness and selfishness, or if it's just in terms of noticing how, I mean, it's the same thing, but as noticing how self-referential everything is for us. So one of the ways I like to talk about this in terms of the transformation is seeing life through the lens of Dharma rather than through the lens of self. But, to start that, we first have to see how much of the way we relate to things is through this lens of self. How does it affect me? You know, and what does it mean about me? What does it have to do with me? And that actually leads to delusion. Um, what was I reading? I was reading something last night that was reminding me how people look at things so much through their own self-view. And I mean, a classic example of this. So, well, let me shift this a little bit, and this will probably bring me back to this idea, is that there's this idea of self, but part of the renunciation of self is also the renunciation of views and opinions. So, because self is tied up, this identity, it's not just a sort of neutral thing. Oh, everything is about me. It's also that we construct something out of that, which how we create that identity. A lot of our identity is about what we believe. This is who I am because I believe this, and historically that's been like my religious beliefs. In our era, it's very much our political beliefs and sort of beliefs about culture. And um, so so a great example of this is racism, which is uh, a essentially a selfish stance, because racism is founded either in economic uh, self-interest or in social status interest. If I'm white, even if I'm not making money, if I'm not exploiting you, you know, as obviously African Americans were as slaves, if I can see myself as better than you, then uh, you know, I that's in my self-interest. I feel it raises my status in my mind. So this is a view that supports self, right? And that we take on in order to satisfy this self craving for status. So it's just another way that we see that, we create a whole belief system only because it satisfies how we feel about ourselves. It has nothing to do with logic or reality. Race is a construction. Race doesn't exist, right? It's only a mental construction, but it satisfies this need in someone. And so as we as we start to be able to look at things through the lens of truth, which is a synonym for dharma, then ideas like this collapse under their own weight. They don't have meaning, any value, and there's no truth in them. And we see, oh, that's just about me supporting this ego. I mean, that's a pretty intense example, but it just, it was something that I remember what made me think of it. Yesterday, I heard someone on the radio, uh, a, a, a clearly a white person saying that they didn't want to vote Democratic because it would become because they're afraid of socialism. And socialism is another new way. It's an advanced stage of racism. The use of the term is because the construction is, oh, it's those poor black people who are going to take the money if we share everything. And so again, it's just like a totally diluted, self-centered view, which is based on a multiple lies. I'm sorry. There you go. It's hard right now. It's 2 weeks today until the election, so it's hard to keep it out of my mind. But let's not talk about that. I'm sure you're all on top of it. I am phone banking twice a week. I hope you're all doing what you can do. In any case, coming back to the Dharma topic at hand, the the point of all this is to end suffering. Just to be clear, this is not about taking his political stance. It's not about being a good person or a bad person. It's that this clinging to the idea of self creates suffering because we wind up in this taking these stances in the world and grasping after more. I need more recognition. It's important how people view me. I need to be right. If I'm wrong, then if I'm wrong about something, that it undermines who I am, and then I'm weaker, and all of that, right? It's all suffering that we create for ourselves that's unnecessary. You know, it's completely unnecessary. It's one of the beautiful things, I think. I'll bring it back to the 12 steps. That one of the things that the 12 steps really helped me with was this protecting ego. The fourth step through the ninth step is a process of really tearing down the ego in a constructive way, if that's possible. It, because for the same reason, because it shows us that there is nothing to protect. When you make amends, or when you look at the things that you've done unskillfully, i- the breakthrough, the spiritual awakening is that all this battle to look good and to not admit our failings was all protecting something that didn't need protecting, that didn't really exist, that was empty. And when we realize that, it's so freeing. So once again, I mean, I come to this point so often, and it seems like lately I've been coming to it a lot, which is that there are aspects about the 12 steps that support elements of Buddhism in very direct ways, in very practical ways that sometimes Western Buddhism particularly doesn't get to. The Western Buddhism can kind of stay on this high level of like, oh, everything is empty, everything is impermanent, but it doesn't really get down into the nuts and bolts of our life and how that manifests and how to break through it, how to break out of it. People don't want to be honest. It's hard to be honest. You don't when you go. I do this thing, and I don't I where I kind of critique this straw man image of Western Buddhism, but I'll just say out of my experience of going to Buddhist meditation groups that were not recovery oriented, I saw very little recognition of suffering in the way that people in the 12-step world recognize and are honest about suffering and honest about self-centeredness and honest about how that self-centeredness creates suffering. That doesn't really get discussed. And it's understandable because the beauty of the 12-step world is like we all come in naked. So there's just no, you can't, there's nothing to cover up or protect anymore. In the Buddhist world, we don't come in naked. We come in kind of as Buddhists, which is already like, I mean, it's funny because people will say, oh, don't you think like saying you're an alcoholic is like not very Buddhist because it's creating an identity? And I really think that, and I've often said, I don't mind being an alcoholic, but I don't want to be a Buddhist. I think being a Buddhist is much more of a problem than being an alcoholic. you know. I find it more burdensome, right? It's more burdensome to say, "Oh, I'm a Buddhist," and then because what do people project on you? What do you project on yourself as a Buddhist? A lot of stuff. And as an alcoholic, I don't care. I don't mind the things people project on me because actually, people project very positive things these days on recovering alcoholics. Probably not so much in 1935, but I do think that there's a way in which, and this is true in general spiritual circles, uh, that people kind of want to look good. You go to church on Sunday, you wear your nice hat, your good suit, and your good tie. You don't come in there naked into the church, uh, and yet you know religion is about the same thing. It's about suffering and ending suffering, but that somehow gets lost because of how people socialize. Whew. I'm getting worked up this morning, so um, I think I'm gonna leave it at that, um, and open it up, which is I'm sort of surprised that there's time left because I feel like I've been talking a lot, but it's good. Cameron, go ahead. What have you got to say?
I just have a quick question. Um, I've heard recently, and it bothered me when I heard it. It was several weeks ago, and I kind of just put it out of my mind. But it came back today, and I heard someone say, "Oh, our beliefs don't make us better people." Well, what do you think about that? Is that true, or is it, or there's some other things in there that maybe I don't know? You have to qualify it in some way. What do you
What
think?
what is it that bothers you about that?
I don't think it's true. I think our
Oh,
beliefs do make us better people. Am I wrong?
I,
I
I
don't
I
know.
don't know. I'm just asking how do you think they make us better people?
Well, I thought, well, it depends on if we're comparing ourselves to other people. That whole discussion about the self and judging other people to make ourselves better.
Yeah.
that's clearly correct, and that I think that you can fall into that trap by saying, "Oh, my beliefs are better than your beliefs." But if I have beliefs that are delusion, and then I change those beliefs to better beliefs, aren't I a better person because of that? So my beliefs do make me a better person. Is that right? That's what I think.
What I would think is if you act on your beliefs, if you live them out,
Uh,
maybe that's I don't really like the construction of a better or a worse person,
yeah, me neither.
but okay, but right. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that maybe I don't know what the person meant by that, but maybe what they were saying is like it doesn't mean anything until you live it out. That would be my
I
take
guess,
on that.
yeah.
Like,
I just think there's truth there, but I don't know. Wanted to hear what you said. So
yeah,
yeah, thank you.
yeah. Thanks, thanks.
Thanks
Nice
a
to
lot.
hear from you,
Thank
Elizabeth. Nice to see you visiting from Great Britain.
Yes, hi,
Hi,
great to be here.
how are
I
you?
missed a couple of sessions and
Yeah.
I'm missing this class. Um, yeah, I've been in the rooms of AA for more than a decade. And the reason I'm saying that is to make the distinction between the length of time that can call myself a Buddhist.
Okay.
And that's very short. I mean, that's like 3-4 months, really. I'm now a Mitra. And my question was, with regard to coming in naked,
Mhm.
and I was wondering what that means to me. And the way I can reconcile it is to say that in the AA tradition, we come in when we've hit rock bottom, and there's nowhere else to go, really, unless you want to carry on digging, but or do a bit more research while you're down there. But you hit rock bottom, and there's that sense of humility
Yep.
that I can resonate with. But I think with Buddhism, it's a different kind of feel for me as somebody in recovery, and I felt as though the choices were still there for me. I think you repudiate by choice. I think in Buddhism, this is the kind of impression I'm getting, that I undertake to refrain
Mhm.
from taking intoxicants, and it's almost it's you can or you may not. It is. I find the choice is there in Buddhism. There's more spaciousness around it. There's more of a autonomy, and I think that comes from the mindfulness aspects as well. Whereas with AA, I felt as though, and I still do, that you either get rid of this or the consequences will knock you back out into hell.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Uh, uh, I guess for me, the choice was a false one, though, and that's where I'm not that comfortable with the idea. I think for some people there is a choice, whether to drink or not, and they can have a drink and it's not a problem. But for me, you know, as long as I kept drinking, there was going to be no real change. And so I don't I don't know that it would be helpful for Buddhism to come out, not I don't know, for Buddhists to come out and say you can't drink and call yourself a Buddhist. But what concerns me sometimes is when I hear from Buddhist teachers that it's okay to make a blanket statement that it's okay to drink, that you're not really breaking the precept. So, you know, I think there's a certain amount of ignorance in the Buddhist world about the addiction. And so they can sort of treat it as like, oh, you have a choice. But, when you're an addict, do you have a choice? I mean, the definition of addiction is that you don't have a choice. You're being dictated to by your
My addiction.
addiction.
Mm.
So it's a tricky one for me.
Mm.
That I don't want to be this, moralist who's going around saying people shouldn't drink. I mean, that, we tried that in America. That didn't work, and we've
Yeah.
tried it with drugs and it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and there are religions that ban alcohol. Islam and Mormonism ban alcohol, and I'm, I don't know what that, if there's any great benefit that comes out of that, So it's a tricky one again,
Mm.
But as you say, I mean, it comes down to mindfulness. And if people are truly committed to mindfulness, then any intoxicant is going to be off the table, because you can't be, it's hard enough to be mindful when you're clear-headed, right?
Yeah.
But to say, oh, I had 2 glasses of wine and I'm just as mindful as I was before, I think that's,
Yeah.
delusion.
Yeah. And for me, I think the cornerstone of mindfulness is coming out of automaticity.
Right.
I'm not just going to pick up that glass because that's what I do all the time. That's my go-to position when I'm feeling down or sad or happy or whatever.
Yeah.
So breaking that chain of automatic thinking and action is helpful.
Exactly. Well, I really appreciate you bringing up these questions. Thank you. It's nice to have you back with us too.
Hi, Kevin. It's John.
Hi, John.
Hi. My experience of saying I'm an alcoholic is actually, for me, more of a release from identity. It's a freedom. It creates freedom. And very different than saying I'm a Buddhist, which feels to me more of a, overlay of true self. The other thing is, you said something once I thought was very wise.
Once?
Many things that are wise, which is that what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is learn to tell our personal stories. And it's a skill to be able to be honest about the nitty-gritty part of our day-to-day lives that I have never found in other groups an opportunity to develop that skill.
Yeah.
And the more personal and the more honest it becomes in AA, the more universal it feels. Like when someone is really at the center of their story and telling it really honestly, everyone can identify. And I don't find any other place. So that's why I feel like AA and Buddhism or say the practice of meditation are so complementary, because I have never found that way of truly being honest about my personal story in a group and interconnected, to create a kind of interconnectedness in a group.
Yeah. And isn't it something about humility, right? Which, it's only been in the last couple of years that I've really started to resonate with humility and what it meant in the steps and what it means in spirituality. But I mean, I really appreciate everything you're saying, John. First of all, I think it's somewhat mysterious why, because I feel the same as you, why we feel more freedom from saying we're alcoholics, whereas most people who are not in recovery would think the opposite, right? So that's just kind of mysterious. But I think it does come down to what you're talking about, that it's not we don't have anything to protect. And I guess as you're talking about it, I'm thinking of the world. I'm thinking of of this world where we don't take care of each other, where we don't live out of love, how we could have a world where we took care of everyone. And that, and it is humility to me in a way. It's because the opposite of humility to me is someone trying to put themselves above others, and that's what kind of creates inequality in the world. And anyway, somehow I'm getting back to politics again, and I didn't mean to, but yeah, thank you. It's beautiful what you're saying. It kind of getting me. Yeah, you know, I don't. So many times I use up all the time we have in my own talks, and I I appreciate hearing everybody's voices, or hearing some voices this morning other than my own.
Hi, Kevin. It's Angela. Oh, sorry, Myrna, go ahead.
I just wanted to share how on my 24-year sobriety birthday, I read your book in to begin my sharing, because I loved how you said about the problem drinker and do they actually have control? You know, if they're not getting drunk every night, and that was me, and I so appreciated that. I mean, that's because I could really, that's where I was. I was a relatively high bottom drunk. And of course, you know, I'm very honest about it. You know, you hear people exaggerate, well, you didn't drink as much as I did. But I knew that inside, I was just a mess. And
Yeah.
I really appreciated that. And I also appreciated you saying that, because I thought, oh, I can identify how you used to drink and do drugs even when you were meditating, you know, like, and I thought, oh, because I did that as well. You know, I knew meditation long before I came into recovery. And yeah, but I really appreciated that kind of like, I think that's where we are today. And we can be of certain help to other people just by saying, not having to put that definition of alcoholic being, you know, way down there.
Right.
I really appreciated that.
Thanks, Myrna. Yeah, I mean, that, I think what you're referring to was my recognition that even though I didn't get drunk every time I drank, sometimes I did, and I didn't mean to. So how could I say I was in control? And you know, growing up, I think my father had a drinking problem before I was born, but he was really strict about his drinking. Like, he only drank on weekends, and he only drank beer and wine, you know. And my mother was very strict about her drinking. She only poured that martini at 5:20 in the afternoon, which happened to coincide with the arrival of my father getting home from work. But you never saw her have that martini at 5 o'clock or 4:30. You know, it was 5:20. That was and I look back now, and I don't like the idea of in retrospect calling people who are dead alcoholics, but you know, they had problems and they were trying to control it, and you know, they did a pretty good job, but you know, yeah, I think the point is, you know, the way I've started to talk about our condition is to say that before I stopped drinking, or while I was drinking and using, I had problems, but I couldn't manage them, and I couldn't grow in my life. Once I stopped drinking and using, I still had problems, but then I could manage the problems. I could, you know, have some spiritual like, growth in my life, emotional growth. And so it wasn't really important how I identified myself. It was, what was the result? It's very Buddhist oriented, right? It's about cause and effect. It's not about good or bad or identification. It's like, what happens when you drink? What happens when you don't drink? Oh, it's better when I don't drink. Okay, enough said. Angela, what you have to say?
Oh, I just had a quick something I'm thinking of, and I think I partially have, yeah, it's something swirling around. First, thank you. I really appreciate the topic and the conversation and bringing it back, and just like bringing it back to I connect a lot to seeing the suffering that's created when we're in that space. But I guess I have like some questions around delusion and honesty, and like when we're able to be honest versus, because I feel like I mean, thinking of people, I'm thinking of someone, who didn't make it. And like the idea that maybe they weren't, or, sometimes there's judgment, I guess, for people who relapse or people who like can't get it or something, like, oh, they're not willing to be honest. And even like people with different, that act in a different way, that's like so clearly like not okay, but like they're clearly in like serious delusion. And so just like I don't know, just how delusion and how do we then see clearly, I guess, how we can tip that so that people do come out of their delusion. I don't know, something that's,
Well, you can't change somebody else's karma, and you can't know what someone else's karma is. So you can just do what you can do. You can offer love, and you can offer support, and you can offer suggestions. But you're sort of asking the age-old question: why do some people make it, and why do some people not make it? My only answer for that is people who make it who want it, and you have to want it, and you can't make someone else want something. But yeah, truthfulness has something to do with it, right? That's what it says in the first paragraph of chapter 5 of the big book, that if people could be honest with themselves, what's the phrase, rarely have we seen someone fail. I have it here, so sorry, I should have that memorized, but I guess I haven't been going to enough meetings. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this program. And then it says, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. That seems like a fairly reasonable diagnosis, but bottom line for me is, it's not my job to like figure out why people, make it or don't make it.
but even for ourselves, like,
Right.
our own delusion, I guess, is more what I was thinking.
Very, very difficult to see through your own delusion. Very difficult. And this is why we have teachers. It's why we have sponsors, why we have friends and people around us, because mostly others are the ones who will show us our delusion. But we have to be, the problem is that we have to be willing to see our delusion. And the reason we don't want to see our delusion is because we're protecting our ego. Back to the theme of the day, right? Yes, and obviously mindfulness practice is meant to cut through that. But when you're meditating, it's only you in there observing. And so it's very hard to not see things through the lens of self, when you are meditating. You know, that's what we're trying to do, is keep stepping out of that lens of self and move into the lens of Dharma. And it's possible. Certainly the Buddha became enlightened, you know, and others have become enlightened. And that's what's happening when that, you know, that's what that means, that they've seen through self and they've seen through delusion. So, yeah, I mean, that's, you know, we just do our best.
Thank you.
Well, there's your closing words. Just do your best.
Just do your best.
That's a
Often
lot of help. Because that always to me is such an insufficient thing to say. I did my best. How do you know what is best? How do I know that that was my best? How do I know I couldn't do better? You know, it's like, couldn't you always do better? Anyway, now we're really getting into the grunge. So, I will say adieu, which of course in French means to God. Adios also to God. But I will see you on Friday, I hope. If not, next Tuesday, and in 2 Tuesdays, if you haven't already, you'll be changing the world. Thank you. So long, all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. Take care of yourself.